First and foremost, let's try and understand how important the gold and platinum sectors are in the country.
Well, in general, more than 60% of South Africa's trade exports are metals of different kinds. So the mining sector in general accounts for a substantial part of our export accounts. It also represents a significant part of the economy. But from an employment point of view, mining has declined substantially over the last 2 decades. 20 years ago, the mining sector in South Africa employed 1.4 million people. Today it employs just 550,000. That is the result of mechanization and automation by the mines, economizing on their use of labor by increasing their use of capital equipment and machinery. So we're expecting over the next 3 to 4 years another 200,000 job losses in the mining sector. But unlike the senseless public announcement by Amplats last year to dismiss 14,000 workers, we expect that retrenchment of 200,000 miners to be very low-key and under the radar. So yes, the mining sector is in distress from an employment point of view, and it has been for a long time.
Now, with the statistics that you've just mentioned, with the analysis you gave us in the past 20 years, well, with regards, of course, to the mining industry, in your view, do you think there is a future or a future of progress that we can expect from the mining industry anytime in the future?
No, we have a serious problem with wages rising above productivity levels in South Africa. Unions are quick to ask for 12 or 15,000 rand as a basic wage, but they never come to the party with agreements around labor productivity. The mines would be happy to pay 12,500 rand as a minimum, so long as the productivity was commensurate. So unfortunately, labor productivity properly measured in South Africa is now at a 46-year low. The same problem besets the mining industry. And of course, these wage demands are unrealistic because there are no concessions for on-the-job performance. And as a result, we're going to see continual unemployment.
Yeah. And of course, the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, has stated that the country cannot afford another labor unrest. What is your view on that?
Well, the Minister of Finance speaks with a forked tongue. He has to toe the party line, the government line, but at the same time, he has to be sensitive to what foreign investors in South Africa have to say. Bond investors in particular are very anxious about prospects for inflation, and inflation is in a vicious cycle with wages. Wages put upward pressure on inflation, and as a result, we see the prices of basic commodities rising. So unfortunately, the economy's 52 million consumers are being held to ransom by 100,000 workers whose wage demands are unrealistic. I don't pay much attention to the finance minister's words. He's really, they're empty words, and they're simply meant to pacify bond investors offshore, which of course they don't do.
I mean, you mentioned that some wage demands, if not most, are particularly and practically unrealistic. Do you think that mine workers could be economically illiterate and not understand that perhaps no company would be willing to pay up a wage increase of 150%?
Well, it's interesting to consider whose interests a strike serves, because it's certainly not mine workers. If you look at the increases they achieve as a result of the strike, it takes 3.5 years to earn back the money they lose while on strike without pay from that extra increase. So there's no economic sense for workers demanding these wage demands. I think it's much more in the interests of mine officials to call strikes. We've certainly seen that participation in strikes has declined. Unions are not required to ballot members ahead of a strike. They're not required to hold secret ballots. As a result, you can get a phenomenon where unions are at a distance from their members and behaving in a way that is sensible for the union but makes no sense or economic sense for the worker.
So it's safe to assume that you don't expect AMCU to accept, or rather you don't expect the AMCU's wage demand to be accepted by, of course, the company, the mining company.
Well, ultimately the mining companies will have to capitulate, but quietly in the background they will reduce their dependence on labour. That's the only option available to the mining companies. So we have this constant tension between employment and wages, and unions are interested in hiking wages to keep competition from young emerging workers out of the workplace. So unions operate in a cartel-like fashion in the interests of their own membership at the expense of employment in general.
Let's move over to the investors now. Could this particular situation, like many have happened before, still scare away investors?
Well, you know, Marikana looms large in any industrial unrest in the platinum sector and the mining sector in general. You know, Marikana, I think, was the result of a really clumsy police action. It was the result of AMCU trying for the first time to dominate negotiations in wages. I don't think we have the same circumstances this year in the mining sector. So I don't think we're going to see the kind of explosive news that we saw previously. But in the background, we must also be aware that COSATU is in distress. COSATU is falling apart. We're observing the fragmentation of the labour movement on the left wing of the political spectrum. AMCU is in disarray from what we understand. Different people within AMCU are pulling in different directions. But I don't think we're going to have the chaos that we observed last year.
All right, Loane Sharp, thank you so much for joining us on ANews.
Thank you.
All right, that was Loane Sharp, of course, Labour analyst. And that's your business news.